My father-in-law, Richard, loved to hold court at family gatherings, a king on a throne of worn floral upholstery. During his last birthday toast, he raised his glass not to his family but to his own legacy, gesturing toward me with a dismissive wave and declaring to the room, and to my daughter-in-law, Amelia, who proves that behind every successful man is a woman, keeping the house warm. The room chuckled, my husband included. They thought he was charming. What Richard never knew, as he lorded over the charming little cottage he rented, was that I wasn't just keeping a house warm. I was a real estate investor, quietly buying up properties all over the city. And in 6 weeks, after his lease was up, he'd find his eviction notice signed by the new owner, me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The scent of roasted rosemary and Richard's self-satisfaction filled the small, overheated dining room. It was his 70th birthday, a milestone that, in his mind, canonized him as the undisputed patriarch of the Thompson family. Every piece of furniture in the rented house, from the polished oak table to the mismatched chairs we all sat on, seemed to absorb his booming voice, making the space feel even smaller, more suffocating. My husband, Leo, sat beside me, his hand resting on my knee in a gesture that might have looked supportive to an outsider, but I knew it for what it was, a gentle anchor, keeping me in my place. For 10 years, I had played my part flawlessly, the supportive wife, the gracious daughter-in-law, the woman whose ambitions had supposedly dissolved into a quiet life of domesticity the moment I said, "I do." It was a role Richard had written for me, and one Leo was happy to see me perform. My background in finance, the sharp instincts that had made me a rising star at a competitive investment firm before I married Leo, were treated as a quaint prelude to my real calling, managing the Thompson household and social calendar. Richard, with a theatrical flourish, tapped his wine glass with a fork. "A toast," he announced, his voice echoing with the authority of a man who had never been questioned. He stood, his frame casting a long shadow in the dim light. He spoke of his achievements, of the business he'd built and sold, of the legacy he was passing to his son. Then his gaze landed on me. "And to my daughter-in-law, Amelia," he began, a patronizing smile spreading across his face, "who proves that behind every successful man is a woman, keeping the house warm." A wave of polite laughter rippled through the room. Leo squeezed my knee, a silent cue to smile, to be a good sport. I felt the familiar heat rise in my cheeks, a mixture of anger and humiliation. It wasn't the first time he'd made such a comment. At every holiday, every family dinner, he found a new way to frame my life as a charming, inconsequential hobby. He'd call me a domestic goddess, patting my head as if I were a prize-winning poodle. He'd ask for my opinion on stock tips only to laugh and say, "Don't you worry your pretty little head about it," before I could even formulate a response. I smiled, the carefully constructed mask of serene acceptance I had perfected over a decade. It was a masterpiece of social camouflage, revealing nothing of the storm raging within me. While Richard saw a housewife, my mind was running calculations, analyzing market trends, and managing a multi-million-dollar real estate portfolio he knew nothing about. My pretty little head was the command center of an operation that would have dwarfed his own business at its peak. As he continued his speech, I scanned the room. I saw the peeling paint in the corner, the slight sag in the ceiling, details a proud homeowner would have fixed, but a tenant like Richard would ignore. He loved this house, not because it was his, but because it projected the image he wanted. A man of distinguished, rustic taste, living out his golden years in a quaint English-style cottage. He was oblivious to the fact that the property was a rental, owned by a distant corporation that saw it as nothing more than a line item on a balance sheet. And I, his housewife daughter-in-law, knew that corporation was looking to offload some of its smaller, single-family assets. Later, as I was clearing the dessert plates, Richard cornered me in the kitchen. "That was a lovely meal, Amelia," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "You have a real talent for these things. It's a gift, you know. Not every woman is content with the simple, important things in life." He leaned against the counter, blocking my exit. "Leo tells me you've been redecorating your guest room. It's good to have projects, keeps the mind occupied. I gripped the stack of plates, my knuckles turning white. My project wasn't a guest room. It was the acquisition of a 3-unit apartment building in a rapidly gentrifying neighborhood, a deal I had structured and closed just last week. The down payment had come from the profits of 2 other properties I had flipped, all managed through a holding company registered under my maiden name, Avance Holdings. To my husband and his family, my frequent trips to the bank were for managing household accounts, and the hours spent on my laptop were for online shopping and recipe hunting. The deception was exhausting but necessary. Richard's blindness was my greatest asset. "I enjoy it," I said, my voice even. "It's fulfilling," he chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. "Of course it is. It's what you were made for." With a final, paternalistic pat on my shoulder, he left the kitchen, leaving me standing in a sea of his casual, soul-crushing dismissals. I took a deep, steadying breath, the anger solidifying into cold, hard resolve. He saw me as a fixture in a house. He was about to find out I was the one who owned them. The world knew me as Amelia Thompson, wife of Leo, daughter-in-law of Richard, a woman whose most pressing concern was whether to serve salmon or beef at her next dinner party. But in the quiet hours of the morning, before the sun rose and the Thompson household stirred, I was Avance. In the small, soundproofed office I'd built, in what was once a walk-in closet, Avance was a formidable force in the city's real estate market. My command center wasn't a sleek high-rise office but this meticulously organized space, hidden in plain sight. One wall was covered in corkboard, pinned with color-coded maps of the city, property listings, and complex financial projections. My desk held 3 monitors, displaying live market data, encrypted communications with my team, and the secure banking portal for Avance Holdings. This was my real world, the one where my intellect wasn't just tolerated but celebrated and monetized. My assistant, Clara, was the only other person who knew the full extent of my double life. Officially, she was my part-time personal organizer, a role that gave her the perfect cover to meet with me several times a week. To Leo, Clara was the cheerful, efficient woman who helped me manage charity auctions and plan family vacations. In reality, she was the COO of my operation, a razor-sharp former paralegal with an encyclopedic knowledge of zoning laws and an allergy to patriarchal nonsense. "The Henderson property is a go." Clara's voice came through my encrypted earpiece as I stood in a sun-drenched kitchen, pretending to deliberate over granite countertop samples for a home I had no intention of renovating. The seller accepted our offer. No contingencies. We close in 30 days. I smiled at the contractor, a man Richard had recommended who spoke only to Leo, even when I was the one asking the questions. "I think the Arctic white is lovely, don't you?" I said, my voice light and airy. The contractor grunted his approval. Inside, I was mentally earmarking the Henderson property's projected rental income for my next acquisition. Building this empire required a level of discipline and secrecy that was all-consuming. Every move was calculated. My wardrobe was a strategic tool. The elegant, understated dresses and cashmere sweaters of Amelia Thompson were a form of camouflage, projecting an image so stereotypically housewife that no one ever looked closer. My shopping trips were clandestine meetings with real estate agents, city planners, and contractors who knew me only as Ms. Vance, a no-nonsense investor with an uncanny eye for undervalued assets. I used burner phones for all business communications, and my business laptop, a high-powered machine with military-grade encryption, was hidden in a false bottom of my antique sewing box. The irony was not lost on me. The very symbols of domesticity that Richard and Leo used to define me were the tools I used to conceal my true power. One afternoon, while Leo was at the golf course with his father, an outing where Richard would undoubtedly complain about the younger generation's lack of grit, while simultaneously bragging about his son's success, I was conducting a site visit. It was a dilapidated warehouse in the industrial district, a property everyone else saw as a teardown. But I had spent weeks analyzing the city's new infrastructure plans. I knew a new light rail station was slated for construction just 2 blocks away, a development that would transform the entire area within 5 years. Dressed in jeans and a baseball cap, a stark contrast to my usual attire, I walked the property with my structural engineer. "The bones are good," he said, his voice echoing in the vast, empty space. "It'll need a new roof and a complete interior overhaul, but the foundation is solid." I saw it not as it was, but as it could be, a mixed-use development with trendy loft apartments and ground-floor retail. It was a high-risk, high-reward investment, the kind of bold move Richard would have called reckless if a woman proposed it. But my numbers were solid, my projections conservative. Vance didn't gamble, she calculated. That evening, back in my role as Amelia Thompson, I listened patiently as Leo recounted his day. "Dad was in rare form," he said, chuckling as he loosened his tie. "He thinks I should be more aggressive with the Miller account. Says I'm too cautious." I murmured something supportive, all the while thinking about the warehouse deal. My aggression was quiet, invisible, but it was moving markets and building an empire. As Leo talked, my personal phone buzzed. It was a news alert. City Council approves light rail expansion in Industrial District. I felt a thrill of victory, a feeling I could never share with him. To him, my greatest success was a perfectly executed soufflé. To me, it was leveraging public information to secure a multi-million-dollar asset before anyone else saw its potential. The gulf between our two realities was vast and lonely, but it was also the source of my strength, Richard's blindness, Leo's benign neglect. They had inadvertently created the perfect environment for my ambition to flourish, unseen and unchecked. The world of high-end real estate and the world of suburban housewives rarely intersect, but they share one common currency: information. My greatest source of information, outside of my own meticulous research, was Sarah Jenkins. Sarah was the city's top real estate agent, a woman who moved through million-dollar listings with the same ease I moved through a grocery store. Officially, she was the agent who had sold us our current home. Unofficially, she was a trusted contact for Vance, a shrewd businesswoman who appreciated my discretion and my ability to close a deal without drama. She had no idea that the sophisticated investor Ms. Vance was the same Amelia Thompson she occasionally saw at neighborhood fundraisers, but she respected both. We met one Tuesday at a noisy coffee shop, a neutral ground where neither of my personas would seem out of place. I was Amelia Thompson today, dressed in yoga pants and a designer hoodie, the picture of suburban leisure. "I have something that might interest your client," Sarah said, sliding a thin folder across the table. Her voice was low, her eyes scanning the room. "It's an off-market listing. The owner is a large investment trust out of state. They're looking to liquidate their smaller residential holdings to focus on commercial properties. They want a quiet, quick sale." My heart began to beat a little faster. These were the deals I lived for. The ones that never hit the open market, where speed and capital were the only things that mattered. I opened the folder. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a photo of a charming, English-style cottage with a perfectly manicured garden. 124 Willow Lane, Richard's house. I kept my expression perfectly neutral, a skill honed by years of practice. It was the ultimate prize, the one property that was more than just an asset. It was a symbol. Owning it would be the checkmate in a game Richard didn't even know we were playing. "The trust is motivated," Sarah continued, oblivious to the earthquake she had just set off in my world. "They're currently leasing it to a long-term tenant, but the lease is up in 2 months. They'd rather sell it vacant. They're asking for a price that, frankly, is about 15% below market value for a quick all-cash offer." I did the math in my head. It was a steal. Not only was it a sound financial investment, but it was the key to my personal liberation. For years, Richard had held his perceived status over me, using his position as the family patriarch to diminish and define me. He had built his kingdom on a foundation of condescension, and that charming cottage was his castle. The thought of holding the deed to his castle, of having the power to decide whether he could stay or go, was intoxicating. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "My client is definitely interested," I said, my voice betraying none of my inner turmoil. "She values discretion above all else." "What's the next step?" Sarah smiled, a shark sensing a successful hunt. "I can draft the offer today. Given the discount, I'd advise coming in at the asking price. No inspections, No financing contingencies. That's what will get their attention. We spent another 20 minutes discussing the details, the mechanics of the purchase, the timeline for the closing. As we spoke, my mind was racing, planning my next moves. I would need to liquidate one of my smaller commercial properties to free up the cash, a move I could execute through Clara within 48 hours. The entire transaction could be completed through my holding company, leaving no paper trail that led back to Amelia Thompson. Richard would have no idea who the new owner was until the day his eviction notice arrived. That night, at dinner, Leo was recounting another one of his father's pronouncements. "Dad's worried about his lease," Leo said, swirling the wine in his glass. "Apparently, the management company has been unresponsive. He's thinking of trying to buy the place, but he says the owners are some faceless corporation that's impossible to deal with." I took a slow sip of my own wine, the irony tasting sweeter than the expensive Cabernet. "That's a shame," I said, my voice a symphony of wifely concern. "He loves that house so much." "He does," Leo agreed. "He calls it his forever home. It would crush him to have to leave." I looked at my husband, a man I loved but who had become a willing accomplice in my diminishment. His loyalty was to his father, his perception of the world shaped by the man who had raised him. He saw his father's arrogance as confidence, his dismissiveness as old-fashioned charm. He had never once defended me, never once challenged Richard's narrative of me as the happy little housewife. In that moment, any lingering guilt I felt about my plan evaporated. This wasn't just about Richard anymore. It was about reclaiming the power and respect I had been denied for a decade. It was about showing them both that the woman they had put in a box was the one who now owned the box. "Well," I said, placing my hand on Leo's, "I'm sure it will all work out for the best." He smiled, relieved. "You're right, it always does." I smiled back, but my smile was different. It was the smile of A. Vance, a woman who didn't wait for things to work out, but who made them happen. The offer for 124 Willow Lane would be submitted in the morning. The game was on. The 48 hours following my coffee with Sarah were a masterclass in compartmentalization. By day, I was Amelia Thompson, a paragon of domestic virtue. I attended a PTA planning meeting for the fall bake sale, where I dutifully volunteered to handle the gluten-free table. I spent an hour on the phone with my mother-in-law, listening to a detailed account of her bridge club's latest drama, offering perfectly timed murmurs of sympathy. I even managed to orchestrate a flawless dinner party for a prospective client of Leo's, a man who, like his father, seemed to find my lack of a real job both charming and reassuring. I played the part so convincingly that at times, I felt a dizzying sense of detachment, as if watching a character in a film. But when the house fell silent, and Leo's steady breathing filled the bedroom, A. Vance would emerge. The process of purchasing 124 Willow Lane was a high-wire act performed without a net. The first step was liquidating the necessary capital. The asset I chose was a small, 3-story office building I'd acquired 2 years prior. It was a reliable income generator, but its growth potential had peaked. Selling it now would provide more than enough cash for Richard's house and leave a healthy surplus for my next investment. Through Clara, I initiated the sale. We already had a standing offer from a rival investment firm that had been trying to buy the building for months. Clara, acting as the intermediary for the ever-reclusive Ms. Vance, contacted their acquisitions department. "Ms. Vance has had a change of heart," she told them, her voice crisp and professional over the secure line. "She is prepared to sell if you can meet her price and close within 72 hours. All cash, no contingencies." It was an aggressive move, designed to leverage their eagerness against them. They grumbled, they postured, but ultimately they agreed. The deal was struck. While the funds were being transferred through a series of carefully planned wire transactions designed to obscure their origin, I was drafting the offer for Willow Lane. Every word was chosen with surgical precision. The offer was submitted under A. Vance Holdings, LLC, a deliberately bland and forgettable name. The purchase price was exactly as Sarah had suggested, a tantalizing figure that screamed easy money to the out-of-state trust. I waived every possible contingency. The message was clear. This buyer was serious, liquid, and wanted no complications. The only thing I requested was absolute discretion until the closing date. Sarah Jenkins handled the submission, her professionalism a perfect shield. To her, this was just another swift, clean transaction for a savvy, if eccentric, client. The tension of those waiting hours was immense. Every buzz of my personal phone sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. Was it Leo? Was it the school? Or was it Sarah with news? I found myself performing my domestic duties with a feverish intensity, as if perfecting the icing on a cupcake or arranging flowers in a vase could somehow impose order on the chaos churning inside me. Leo, oblivious, commented on my good mood. "You seem happy lately," he said one evening, catching my hand as I bustled around the kitchen. "All this party planning must agree with you," I smiled, a tight, brittle thing. "I just like to keep busy." The call came on a Thursday afternoon while I was in the produce aisle of the grocery store, trying to decide between organic kale and regular. My burner phone, tucked deep in my purse, vibrated silently. I feigned a call from my mother and stepped into a quiet corner near the floral department. "They accepted." Sarah's voice was triumphant. "No counteroffer. They want to close as soon as possible. Their legal team is drafting the papers as we speak." Relief washed over me, so potent it made me dizzy. I gripped the shopping cart for support, the scent of lilies and refrigerated greens filling my senses. It was done. The house was mine. "Excellent," I managed to say, my voice steady. "Proceed as planned. Inform my legal team." The closing was scheduled for the following Friday, to be handled entirely by our lawyers. I wouldn't need to be present. Vance never was. But the week leading up to it was its own special kind of hell. Richard, his anxiety mounting, had become a constant presence. He'd call Leo multiple times a day with updates on the silent treatment he was receiving from his landlords. He even started showing up at our house unannounced, ostensibly to see his son, but really to vent his frustrations. "It's the principle of the thing, you see," he declared one afternoon, pacing our living room while I pretended to read a magazine. "A man ought to be able to get a straight answer. I've been a model tenant for 5 years. 5 years. And they can't even be bothered to return a phone call about a lease renewal." I listened, my face a mask of sympathy, my mind a whirlwind of irony. The reason the corporation was so unresponsive was that my legal team, acting for the new buyer, had instructed them to cease all communication with the current tenant, to avoid any legal complications before the closing. Richard's frustration was a direct consequence of my own actions. The day of the closing, I felt a strange, unnerving calm. I dropped Leo at the train station for a business trip, kissing him goodbye with a casual affection that felt like a betrayal. Then, instead of going home, I drove to a small park overlooking the city. I sat on a bench, the signed closing documents, delivered by courier to a P.O. box that morning, resting in a manila envelope on my lap. The city skyline gleamed in the distance, a testament to ambition and concrete. I had become a player in that world, a builder, a queen in my own secret kingdom. But the victory felt hollow, the triumph laced with a profound sense of isolation. I had a multi-million-dollar real estate empire, but I had no one to share the victory with. I had proven Richard wrong in the most definitive way imaginable, but the proof was a secret I had to keep locked away. For a moment, I allowed myself to feel the weight of it all, the lies, the compartmentalization, the sheer, crushing loneliness of my success. The woman on the park bench, Amelia Thompson, was envied by her friends for her seemingly perfect life. The woman behind the LLC, Vance, was respected by her peers for her ruthless efficiency, but neither of them was truly whole, and neither of them was truly free. I took a deep breath, pushing the feelings down. This was the price of power, the cost of the game. I had chosen to play, and I was winning. That had to be enough. I started the car and drove home, the envelope with the deed to my father-in-law's life tucked safely in my designer handbag. The trap was set. Now all I had to do was wait for him to walk into it. With the deed to 124 Willow Lane secured in a safe deposit box under the name A. Vance, the nature of the game changed. The thrill of the chase was replaced by the tense, quiet waiting of a hunter in a blind. The closing had been seamless, a silent, digital exchange of funds and signatures that officially made me the owner of my father-in-law's home. The only remaining step was to inform the current tenant that his lease would not be renewed. My lawyer had advised waiting until 30 days before the lease expired to send the official notice, giving Richard the legally required amount of time, but no more. Every day that passed was another turn of the screw. Richard's anxiety, which had been simmering for weeks, began to boil over. His unannounced visits became more frequent, his monologues more frantic. He was a man adrift, stripped of the certainty he had always taken for granted. He had built his identity on being in control, on being the one who dictated terms. The silence from the faceless corporation was an affront to his entire sense of self. He couldn't bully, charm, or negotiate with a void. "They're trying to push me out, that's what it is," he declared one Sunday afternoon, jabbing a finger in the air as he paced our patio. I was pruning roses, the sharp snip of the shears providing a satisfying counterpoint to his rant. Some developer probably wants to tear down the whole block and put up one of those ghastly condominium monstrosities. They don't care about character, about history. I snipped off a withered bloom. "I'm sure that's not it, Dad," I said, my voice soothing. "It's probably just a bureaucratic mix-up." Leo, caught between his father's escalating panic and his own innate desire for a peaceful life, began to show signs of strain. He became withdrawn, his brow perpetually furrowed. He started defending his father with a new, almost desperate fervor. "You have to understand, Amelia. That house is everything to him," he told me one night in bed. "It's where he planned to live out his days. He feels like he's losing his footing." "I do understand," I said, and it was true. I understood perfectly. I understood that the house was a symbol of the stable, respectable legacy he believed he had earned. And I was the one secretly kicking the foundations out from under it. The guilt was a constant, low-grade hum beneath the surface of my daily life. It was one thing to outsmart a rival in a business deal. It was another to methodically dismantle the emotional security of a family member, even one who had treated me so poorly. The cracks started to appear not just in Richard's composure, but in my own carefully constructed facade. The stress of maintaining the deception began to wear on me. I became forgetful about small things related to my Amelia life, a missed coffee date with a friend, forgetting to pick up Leo's dry cleaning. My mind was so consumed with the details of my empire and the impending confrontation with Richard that the minutiae of my cover story began to slip. Leo, his senses perhaps sharpened by his own anxiety, started to notice. "You seem distracted lately," he commented one evening, watching me as I stared blankly at my laptop, the screen displaying a gourmet recipe I had no intention of making. In reality, I had a minimized window open with the final draft of the eviction notice my lawyer had prepared. "Is everything okay?" I snapped the laptop shut, my heart hammering. "Just tired," I said, forcing a smile. "Planning that charity gala is more work than I expected." It was a plausible lie, and he accepted it, but the moment lingered. He was watching me more closely now. He noticed the second phone, my charity phone as I called it, vibrating at odd hours. He questioned a large withdrawal from our joint household account, which I had to explain away as an advance payment for the gala's caterer, a lie that required me to then have a convoluted conversation with Clara to create a fake invoice. The architecture of my deception was becoming increasingly complex, a fragile web of lies that felt as though it could collapse at any moment. The breaking point came in a way I never expected. My real estate agent, Sarah Jenkins, hosted an annual client appreciation party at her home. It was a major networking event, and she had invited both Amelia Thompson and, separately, A. Vance. Obviously, only one of us could attend. I RSVP'd as Amelia Thompson, a necessary tribute to my public persona. The party was a blur of champagne, small talk, and forced smiles. As I was making my way through the crowd, I saw Leo engaged in a surprisingly intense conversation with Sarah. My blood ran cold. What could they possibly be talking about? I drifted closer, pretending to admire a painting on the wall, straining to hear. Just seems like a strange coincidence, Leo was saying, his voice tight with a mixture of suspicion and confusion. My father's landlord, a big, faceless trust, suddenly decides to sell his house in a quiet, off-market deal, and your mystery client just happens to snap it up? Who is this person? Sarah, ever the professional, maintained a pleasant, unreadable expression. Leo, you know I can't discuss my client's business. But I can assure you, it was a completely standard transaction. The trust wanted a quick sale, and my client was able to provide it. But Leo wouldn't let it go. This client of yours, you've never met them in person, have you? It's all done through lawyers and assistants. Many of my high-net-worth clients value their privacy, Sarah said smoothly. It's not unusual at all. I felt a wave of panic. He was connecting dots I never thought he'd even see. I had to intervene. I walked over, looping my arm through his. Darling, there you are, I chirped, my voice a few notes too high. I was just telling Mrs. Henderson how much we love the caterer you recommended. I turned to Sarah, my smile bright and wide. Sarah, this is such a lovely party. You have a real gift for bringing people together. The interruption worked. The conversation shifted, the moment of danger passing. But as I led Leo away towards the cheese board, he looked at me, his eyes filled with a new, unsettling light. The suspicion wasn't gone. It had just been redirected. He wasn't just suspicious of the mystery client anymore. He was suspicious of me. The week after the party was a cold war fought in the quiet corridors of our home. Leo's suspicion was a tangible presence, a third person in our marriage. He stopped asking direct questions, which was somehow more unnerving. Instead, he watched. He watched me when I was on my laptop, his gaze lingering a moment too long. He'd pick up my charity phone when it buzzed, studying the blank screen with an intensity that made my skin crawl. The easy, comfortable rhythm of our life had been replaced by a tense, fragile quiet. We moved around each other with the careful choreography of strangers, the air thick with unspoken words. His love for me was now at war with his loyalty to his father and the dawning, terrible suspicion he couldn't bring himself to voice. I found my only solace in the encrypted calls with Clara. She was more than an employee. She was my co-conspirator, the sole keeper of my other self. One rainy Tuesday, with Leo at the office and the house feeling like a mausoleum, I locked myself in my office and called her. The final notice is ready to be sent, I said, my voice flatter than I intended. The lawyer is just waiting for my signal. Good, Clara replied, her tone all business. The timeline is holding. Are you ready? The simple question hung in the air. Was I ready? I was ready for the confrontation, for the end of the deception, but I wasn't ready for the collateral damage I knew was coming. He's starting to figure it out, I confessed, the words rushing out. Leo, he knows something is wrong. He cornered Sarah Jenkins at a party, asking about the, quote, his father's house. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Clara rarely deviated from her professional demeanor, but I could hear the faint sigh. How did Sarah handle it? Perfectly. But it doesn't matter. The suspicion is there now. He looks at me differently, Clara. Like he's seeing a stranger. In a way he is, she said, not unkindly. He's never met A. Vance. I know, I whispered, staring at the corkboard map of my empire. Each pin represented a victory, a testament to my skill and intellect. But in that moment, they felt like monuments to my isolation. I built all of this to prove I was more than what they saw. But what if, in the end, I lose the one person who I thought saw me at all, even if his vision was blurry? Leo saw the woman you pretended to be, Clara said, her voice firm, pulling me back from the edge. Because it was comfortable for him. He benefited from the housewife just as much as his father did. The question isn't whether you'll lose him. It's whether the man he becomes after the truth comes out is a man you'd even want. Now about the notice. We are 3 days away from the 30-day legal notification window. Do I give the lawyer the go-ahead? Her words were a bracing slap of reality. She was right. My focus had to be on the objective. The emotional fallout was a storm I had to weather, not avoid. I looked at the picture on my desk, a smiling photo of Leo and me from a vacation years ago, a time when our life felt simpler, before the weight of my secrets and his willful ignorance had created a chasm between us. "Yes," I said, my voice clear and resolved. "Tell him to proceed. Send the letter." Giving the order was like pulling a pin from a grenade. The action itself was small and quiet, a single word spoken over an encrypted line, but it set in motion an explosion I had been planning for years. My lawyer, a discreet and efficient man who knew me only as a voice on the phone and a name on a legal entity, confirmed receipt of my instruction. "The notice of non-renewal of lease will be sent via certified mail to the tenant at 124 Willow Lane tomorrow morning," he stated. "A copy will be sent to your P.O. box. The 30-day countdown will commence upon confirmed delivery." That night, sleep was impossible. I lay in bed, feigning slumber, as Leo tossed and turned beside me. His restlessness was a physical manifestation of the anxiety that had taken root in our home. I felt a pang of sorrow for the man he was in that moment, a man torn between the father he idolized and the wife he was beginning to fear. He was collateral damage in a war he never knew was being waged. But the sorrow was swiftly replaced by a harder emotion: resolve. He had chosen comfort over curiosity, complacency over partnership. He had laughed along with his father's jokes, patted my hand when I was dismissed, and benefited from the seamless, elegant life I curated for him while silently building my own. His ignorance was not entirely innocent. The next day, I tracked the certified letter online using the number my lawyer provided. The sterile, impersonal updates on the Postal Service website felt bizarrely momentous. I imagined the letter in the mail carrier's bag, a simple white envelope containing words that would detonate a family. It was addressed to Mr. Richard Thompson. The sender was listed as A. Vance Holdings, LLC, a name that meant nothing to him, but everything to me. Movgi Edak, Ilvgi EC, Yugi, Move. At 11:42 a.m., the status changed. He had it. The countdown had begun. I closed my laptop, my hands steady, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. I walked through my beautiful, silent house, a home that had served as the perfect cover for my operations. I ran my hand along the cool marble of the kitchen island, a surface upon which I had planned both dinner parties and corporate takeovers. The duality of my life had reached its final act. The two worlds I had so carefully kept separate were about to collide with cataclysmic force. I had spent the afternoon in a state of suspended animation, waiting for the phone to ring. I knew it wouldn't be Richard calling me, it would be him calling Leo, in a fit of rage and terror. And then Leo, his voice shaking with dawning horror, would call me. The waiting was the hardest part. Anas. The call came at 5:17 p.m., just as I was taking a tray of rosemary chicken out of the oven. The very picture of domestic tranquility. My personal phone rang, and Leo's face flashed on the screen. I let it ring twice before answering, composing my features into a mask of pleasant inquiry. "Hello, darling," I said. "On your way home?" "Amelia." His voice was strained, breathless. "My dad, he just called me. I don't know, he's hysterical." I feigned concern, placing the hot tray on the counter. "What happened? Is he all right?" "He got a letter," Leo said, his words tumbling out. "From the new owners of his house. They're terminating his lease. He has to be out in 30 days. 30 days? I echoed, infusing my voice with shock. "That's awful. Can they even do that?" "Apparently they can," he said, and I could hear the grinding frustration in his voice. "It's all legal. The letter was from some soulless holding company, A. Vance Holdings." He said my name, my real name, and my blood turned to ice, even though I knew he had no idea. The sound of it from his lips, spoken with such venom, was a physical blow. "He's falling apart, Amelia," he kept yelling. "They're throwing me out. After all this time, they're throwing me out onto the street. He says he's ruined. That's a terrible thing to happen to him. I said, my voice a soft murmur of sympathy. I was a puppeteer, comforting the puppet whose strings I was pulling. The duplicity was sickening, but I held my ground. I have to go over there, Leo said, his voice ragged. He's alone, and I've never heard him like this. He sounds old, Amelia. For the first time in my life, he just sounds old and scared. The line went dead. I stood in the kitchen, the scent of roasting chicken filling the air. The king was dethroned. The man who had built his identity on power and control was reduced to a scared old man. I had done that. I felt a flicker of something, not triumph, but a deep, aching sadness. This was the cost, this was the price of being seen. I sank into a kitchen chair, the perfect dinner growing cold on the counter, as the aftershocks of my quiet declaration of war began to shake my world to its very foundations. Richard's implosion sent shockwaves through the family, and our home became the epicenter. Leo spent the next 2 weeks in a frantic state of damage control, shuttling between our house and his father's, trying to placate a man who was becoming more unraveled by the day. Richard, in his desperation, was a parody of his former self. His booming arrogance was replaced by a whiny, self-pitying victimhood. He showed up at our house one Saturday morning, his eyes wild and bloodshot. "Leo, you have to do something," he pleaded, grabbing his son's arm. "Call a lawyer. Call the newspapers. This can't be legal." "Dad, I've spoken to 3 lawyers," Leo said, his face etched with exhaustion. "The notice is ironclad. The new owner is within their rights." Richard's gaze then fell on me as I stood in the doorway, observing the scene. A new, desperate idea lit up his eyes. "Amelia," he said, his voice suddenly conspiratorial, "you're good at this sort of thing. Planning, organizing. You could help me look for a new place. And maybe you could find out who this A. Vance is. A woman knows how to find things out. A little digging." The audacity of it was breathtaking. He was asking me, the architect of his downfall, to help him investigate myself. Leo cut him off. "Dad, leave Amelia out of this. It's not her problem." But the seed was planted. The final, unbearable piece of irony was now in play. The pressure finally broke Leo a few nights later. He came home late, smelling of the whiskey he and his father had undoubtedly been nursing. He didn't turn on the lights but stood in the darkened living room where I was reading. "He asked me for money today," Leo said, his voice hollow. "Said he couldn't afford the deposit on a new rental. The man who lectured me my entire life about financial responsibility asked me for a handout. I said nothing, merely watched him. I went to the county clerk's office," he continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "I looked up the records for A. Vance Holdings. It's an LLC, sealed. Impossible to see who the principals are without a court order." He took a step closer, his silhouette blocking the moonlight from the window. "But the mailing address for the company, it's a P.O. box, at the post office on Elm Street, the same one you use for your charity work." My blood froze. I had been so careful, but I had overlooked that one tiny detail. A detail only he would know. "That's a coincidence," I said, my voice barely audible. "Is it?" he whispered, his voice cracking with a pain that was terrifying to behold. "Is it a coincidence that the mystery buyer uses your post office? Is it a coincidence that this all started after Dad's last birthday, after he insulted you again in front of everyone, and I just sat there and toured? Let him? Is it a coincidence that my just a housewife wife, who used to be a brilliant financial analyst, suddenly has a secret charity phone and access to large sums of cash?" He was standing right in front of me now, his face a mask of anguish in the dim light. He was putting it all together, the 1,000 tiny pieces of my double life, and the picture they formed was destroying him. "Amelia," he begged, his voice breaking completely. "Please, just tell me I'm crazy." I looked into the eyes of my husband, the man I had once loved with all my heart, and I knew the game was over. The lies had run their course. I took a slow breath and gave him the one thing I had left to give, the truth. "You're not crazy, Leo." The confession was quiet, devoid of the drama I had imagined. In the crushing silence of our living room, I laid it all bare. The holding company under my maiden name, the secret office, the portfolio of properties, Clara, the years of quiet planning. I told him everything, my voice a monotone, chronicling my secret life as if reading a financial report. Leo listened without moving, his face unreadable. When I finished, he simply turned and walked out of the room. I heard the front door close gently behind him. He didn't slam it. The quiet was infinitely worse. He didn't come home for 3 days. The notice period ticked down. Richard's frantic calls went unanswered. I was alone in the large, silent house, the undisputed queen of a kingdom of one. On the 30th day, moving day, I knew what I had to do. This couldn't end with a sterile legal notice. Richard deserved to see his executioner. I drove to 124 Willow Lane. It was a chaotic scene. A moving truck was parked at the curb, its ramp lowered like a tongue sticking out at the world. 2 movers were hauling out boxes marked kitchen and books. And there, on the manicured lawn he had so proudly tended, stood Richard. He looked lost, a king surveying the ruins of his castle. He was arguing with one of the movers about a scratched table leg, his voice thin and reedy. He saw me get out of the car and his face shifted into a look of weary relief. Amelia. Thank God. Leo won't answer his phone. I don't know where he is. This is a nightmare. I know where he is, Richard, I said, my voice calm and even as I walked towards him. He's at a hotel, trying to process the fact that his entire marriage was a lie. Richard stared at me, confused. What are you talking about? I stopped in front of him, standing on the grass he no longer had any right to. I'm the one who bought your house, Richard. He blinked, a flicker of disbelief in his eyes. He tried to laugh, but it came out as a strangled cough. That's not funny, Amelia. I'm not joking. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folded document. It was a copy of the deed. I held it out for him to see. A. Vance Holdings, LLC. Amelia Vance. That's my maiden name. I own this house. I own the ground you're standing on. He stared at the paper, his face slackening as the truth finally penetrated his wall of denial. The color drained from his cheeks. He looked from the paper to my face, and for the first time, he truly saw me. Not the demure housewife. Not the charming accessory. He saw the architect of his ruin. You? He whispered, his voice filled with a dawning horror. Why? And there, on the lawn of the home I now owned, I told him. For every time you called me just a housewife, I said, my voice low, but carrying with lethal precision. For every time you patted me on the head and dismissed my opinion. For every time you laughed at my little projects while I was closing 7-figure deals. You built your sense of importance on making me feel small. You saw me as a decorative object in the background of your life, so I decided to buy the background. You wanted me to keep the house warm, Richard. So I did. I bought it and now I'm kicking you out. He stumbled backward, catching himself on a stack of boxes. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He was utterly broken. The powerful patriarch was gone, replaced by a shell of a man, finally confronted with a consequence he never could have imagined, delivered by the person he had underestimated most. I had my victory. It was as total and as devastating as I had planned, and it felt like ash in my mouth. Fayne. The months following the reckoning were a study in deconstruction. My marriage to Leo was the first casualty. We met with lawyers, the proceedings as quiet and civil as the end of our marriage had been. There were no fights, no recriminations. There was nothing left to say. He looked at me with a stranger's eyes, his expression, a mixture of awe and terror. En sexai te ted kamad tuanamit. I don't know who you are, he told me during our final meeting, his voice flat, and I don't think I have the courage to find out. He moved out of the city, taking a job in another state, seeking a simpler life, where wives were just wives, and there were no empires hiding in sewing boxes. I didn't fight him. I let him go. The man I had loved had been an illusion, and the woman he had loved had been one too. Richard was the second casualty. He refused to speak to me. He moved into a sterile, soulless senior apartment complex across town, a place that smelled of disinfectant and regret. His friends, hearing his side of the story, the tale of the vindictive, monstrous daughter-in-law, rallied around him. I became a villain in the social circles I had once so carefully managed. I was excommunicated. And I was free. I sold our marital home and moved into a sleek penthouse apartment downtown, the headquarters of Avance Holdings now occupying the entire floor below me. I stopped hiding. I embraced my identity as a real estate magnate. I gave interviews, my story, sanitized for public consumption, becoming a sort of feminist business legend. I was ruthless, I was brilliant, I was feared, and I was respected. I had everything I thought I wanted. And I had never been more alone. The victory was real, but so was the cost. In destroying the box they had put me in, I had also destroyed the family, the life, and the love, however flawed, that had come with it. There were nights, in my vast, empty apartment overlooking the glittering city I had conquered, that I wondered if the price had been too high. A year later, I stood on the newly renovated porch of 124 Willow Lane. I had decided not to sell it. Instead, I'd had it meticulously restored, pouring my own taste and capital into making it perfect. It was my trophy, my reminder. The front door opened and Clara walked out, smiling. "The caterer is set up in the garden," she said. "The first round of guests should be arriving soon." The house was not my home. It was the first official headquarters for the Vance Foundation, a nonprofit I had established to provide seed capital and mentorship to female entrepreneurs, specifically those whose ideas were dismissed by traditional investors. Today was our inaugural mentorship gala. Hilakt. I walked through the rooms, no longer smelling of Richard's self-satisfaction, but of fresh paint and new beginnings. Young, ambitious women were chatting in the living room where I had been dismissed, their laptops open on the dining table where I had been humiliated. I was giving them the one thing I never had, a room of their own, both literally and figuratively. My phone buzzed. It was an email with the subject line, "Thinking of you." It was from Leo. He sent one every few months. They were short, observational notes. He was teaching history at a community college. He had adopted a dog. He was happy. He never asked to see me. He never mentioned his father. They were messages sent from a different universe, a life I had chosen not to live. I read it, felt a familiar, dull ache, and then deleted it. Later, as the party was in full swing, I saw a man lingering awkwardly at the edge of the driveway, half hidden by the shadows of a large oak tree. It was Richard. He was thinner, grayer. He looked every one of his 71 years. He was holding a small, potted orchid. He saw me looking and took a hesitant step forward. "I wasn't going to come," he said, his voice raspy, "but I saw the announcement in the paper. About the foundation." He looked around at the vibrant, energetic scene. "You've done a good thing here." He thrust the orchid towards me. "A housewarming gift," he mumbled. "A little late." I took it from him. The gesture was small, inadequate, but it was also the first olive branch he had ever extended. It was the first time he had ever acknowledged a world outside his own ego. "Thank you, Richard," I said. We stood in silence for a moment, the chasm between us still vast but no longer a raging inferno. "He's okay, you know," Richard said quietly. "Leo, he's happy." "I know," I replied. "I'm happy for him." He nodded, then turned to leave. He hadn't asked to come in. He knew he didn't belong here. This world, this house, was no longer his. It was mine. And I had filled it with people who, like me, were determined to build something of their own. I watched him walk away, a relic from a past I had burned down to build my future. I placed the orchid on the porch railing and turned back to the party, back to the noise and the light and the brilliant, beautiful future being born in the house I had bought not for revenge but for reclamation. The price had been high, But for the first time, standing in the home that had once been the site of my deepest humiliation, now transformed into a beacon of my greatest triumph, I knew without a doubt that it had been worth it. I had acquired more than a house, I had acquired myself. 5 years. In the world of finance and real estate, 5 years is an eon, long enough for skylines to change and fortunes to be made and lost. For Amelia Vance, it had been a period of relentless, exponential growth. A. Vance Holdings was no longer a secret operation run from a closet. It was one of the city's most influential private real estate investment firms, with a portfolio that spanned residential, commercial, and innovative sustainable development projects. The name Amelia Vance was now synonymous with sharp, decisive, and often ruthless business acumen. She was a regular feature in financial magazines, the subject of both laudatory profiles and cautionary tales. She had become the titan she had set out to be. The penthouse apartment, once a symbol of her stark freedom, now felt more like a fortress. Its minimalist decor and panoramic views of the city she had conquered were a constant reminder of her success, but also of its inherent solitude. Her days were a blur of board meetings, site visits, and financial analysis, managed with military precision by Clara, who was now the official, highly compensated COO of the entire operation. Her nights were often spent alone, with a glass of wine and the company of quarterly reports. The thrill of the win, once so potent, had faded into the quiet hum of maintenance. She had built the empire, and now she had to run it. The crown, she had discovered, was heavier than she had ever imagined. The Vance Foundation had become her true passion. It was the one part of her life that felt unequivocally good, untainted by the ghosts of her past. She took an active role, personally reviewing applications and mentoring her chosen entrepreneurs. She saw her younger self in their eyes, the same hunger, the same frustration with being overlooked, the same burning desire to prove the world wrong. In a small, locked part of her heart, she knew she was trying to give them the validation she had to seize for herself. One Tuesday morning, during a board meeting for a new, ambitious mixed-use development project, the name Thompson appeared on the agenda. It wasn't Richard or Leo. It was Thompson & Sons Construction, a well-regarded local firm that was bidding for the main contract. For a moment, her breath caught in her throat. The name was a common one, but it was a stone dropped into the placid waters of her carefully ordered life. "Their bid is the most competitive," Clara said, her eyes meeting Amelia's across the polished boardroom table. "And their reputation for quality is impeccable. On paper, they are the best choice." Amelia stared at the name on the presentation slide. It was a ghost at the feast. She had spent 5 years building walls around her past, creating a new identity so powerful it had almost erased the woman who was once a Thompson. But the past was never truly gone. It was just waiting for an opportunity to reassert itself. "Scrutinize their financials," Amelia ordered, her voice colder than she intended. "I want a full workup on their capital reserves, their debt load, their supply chain. Leave no stone unturned." The board members exchanged uneasy glances. Her reaction was uncharacteristically intense for a routine vendor selection. Clara simply nodded. "Of course," she said. After the meeting, Clara followed her back to her office. "Are you all right?" she asked, closing the door behind them. "I'm fine," Amelia said, turning to look out at the city. "It's just a name." "Amelia," Clara said, her voice soft but firm. "You've built all of this. You don't have to let a name spook you. And you don't have to punish a good company because of it." Amelia knew she was right. Her reaction was emotional, not strategic. A rookie mistake she would never tolerate in one of her mentees. It was a sign that the walls she had built were not as impenetrable as she believed. The ghost of Amelia Thompson was still there, and she was rattling her chains. "You're right," Amelia said, sighing. "Do the due diligence. If they're the best, they're the best. A name is just a name." But as she looked out at her kingdom of glass and steel, she knew it wasn't true. Some names could never be just names. They were echoes of a life, a love, a war she had won, but whose battlefields she still carried inside her. The due diligence on Thompson and Sons construction came back flawless. They were financially sound, their work was exemplary, and their bid was, by a significant margin, the best. To deny them the contract would be a poor business decision, driven by emotion. Amelia, ever the two-time pragmatist, signed the contract. A. Vance Holdings and Thompson and Sons were now partners in building the city's next great landmark. The project kickoff meeting was held in the A. Vance boardroom. Amelia sat at the head of the table, a position of unquestioned authority. The team from Thompson and Sons filed in, led by a man in his late 60s with a warm smile and kind eyes. Mr. Thompson, the patriarch. His two sons followed him. They were bright, professional, and bore no resemblance to Leo. This was a different tribe, a different legacy. The meeting proceeded smoothly. Mr. Thompson and his sons were deferential but confident, clearly thrilled to be working with her firm. They spoke of craftsmanship, integrity, and partnership. They were everything Richard had pretended to be. The irony was a constant, bitter taste in her mouth. She was now in the position of power, the one granting the opportunity, the one whose approval mattered. She found herself being unusually gracious, complimenting their past work, praising their proposal. She was performing a role, just as she had in her old life, but this time the role was magnanimous CEO, not demure housewife. 2 weeks into the project, an issue arose. There was a discrepancy in the zoning permits filed with the city years ago, a minor error from a previous survey that could cause significant delays. It was the kind of bureaucratic snag that required navigating the labyrinthine city planning department. Clara's team was on it, but progress was slow. The problem, Clara explained, pointing to a blueprint in Amelia's office, is that the original surveyor who signed off on the incorrect plat map needs to be located to sign the corrected variance. The city won't accept anyone else's signature. Who was the surveyor? Amelia asked, already feeling a familiar sense of dread. Clara hesitated. He's retired now. It took us 2 days to track him down. He lives in a senior community across town. His name is Richard Thompson. The room seemed to shrink. The air grew thick. It was a trap, laid by the universe itself. To move forward with her flagship project, she needed a signature from the man whose life she had systematically dismantled. She, Amelia Vance, the titan of industry, needed a favor from the man she had vanquished. There has to be another way, Amelia said, her voice tight. A legal workaround, a different city department. We've explored everything, Clara said gently. The city planning code is archaic on this point. It has to be him. I can send a legal courier with the documents. He can just sign them. You don't have to be involved. Amelia stared at the blueprint. The building, her legacy project, was being held hostage by this final, absurd link to her past. Sending a courier felt like cowardice. It was a continuation of the hiding, the operating from the shadows. She had vowed to be done with that. If she was to be the chuckled, powerful, decisive leader she claimed to be, she had to face this head-on. She couldn't let the ghost of Richard Thompson hold power over her. No, she said, her decision crystallizing. I'll go myself. Schedule a meeting. Tell him it's a matter of urgent business concerning the new Northgate Tower. She would go to him not as his former daughter-in-law, but as the CEO of the company whose project he was now obstructing. She would put him in his place one final time, a simple business transaction between two professionals. But as she said the words, a cold knot of anxiety formed in her stomach. This wasn't just business. It never had been. Though, the day before her scheduled meeting with Richard, Amelia had her monthly mentoring session with Maya, the most promising of the Vance Foundation's first-round entrepreneurs. Maya was in her late 20s, a brilliant software engineer who had developed a revolutionary logistics platform. She was also fiery, impatient, and constantly frustrated by the condescension she faced from the male-dominated tech industry. They don't listen, Maya fumed, pacing Amelia's office. I was in a pitch meeting yesterday, and the lead VC spent the entire time explaining my own algorithm to me. He called it gutsy for a woman to be so deep in hard tech. He asked if my husband helped me with the code. Amelia listened, a wry smile on her face. It was a story she knew well, just with different characters and a different setting. He wanted to know if I was planning on having children soon, Maya continued, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Because, my uterus is a direct threat to his potential ROI. What did you do? Amelia asked. I wanted to flip the table over, Maya admitted. But I just smiled. I smiled, and I calmly explained the scalability of the platform and the 3 patents we have pending. I killed them with competence. Just like you always say. Good, Amelia said. Losing your temper is a luxury they want you to indulge in. It confirms their biases. Starve them of that satisfaction. Maya slumped into a chair, her anger deflating into exhaustion. But it's so hard, Amelia. Does it ever stop? Do you ever get to a point where you don't have to fight twice as hard just to be taken seriously? The question, so honest and raw, hit Amelia with surprising force. Here she was, the powerful CEO, the woman who had conquered her world, and she was about to face her own ghost. Was she any different from Maya, still fighting the same battles, just on a larger scale? The battles change, Amelia said carefully, choosing her words. The scale gets bigger, the weapons get more sophisticated, but I think the fight is always there, in some form. You just get stronger, and you learn to choose your battles more wisely. She looked at Maya, seeing the reflection of her own past, but also a glimpse of a better future. The goal isn't to stop fighting. The goal is to get to a place where you're fighting for something bigger than just your own right to be in the room. You're fighting to build something. You're fighting on behalf of all the women who will come after you. Inspired by her own words, Amelia made a decision. I have a meeting tomorrow, Maya, she said. With someone who represents a significant piece of my past, someone who never saw me as anything more than a housewife. I have to get his signature on a document to move a major project forward. What are you going to do? Maya asked, leaning forward, her eyes wide. I was going to go in there as a CEO and put him in his place, Amelia confessed. I was going to use my power to make him feel small, to win again. She paused, the realization settling over her. But that's the old fight. That's the battle for recognition. I've already won that one. She stood up and walked to the window. I think I'm going to try something different this time. I'm not going to fight at all. The senior community where Richard lived was exactly as Amelia had imagined, beige, quiet, and smelling faintly of faded potpourri. She found him sitting on a communal patio, reading a newspaper. He looked smaller than she remembered, diminished by the anonymous architecture around him. When he saw her approaching, a flicker of his old defensiveness crossed his face. He folded his newspaper, creating a barrier between them. Amelia, he said, his voice stiff. I was told you were coming about a business matter. I am, she said, sitting in the plastic chair opposite him without waiting for an invitation. She placed the blueprint and the variance document on the table between them. She didn't launch into an explanation. She didn't assert her authority. She simply waited. He looked at the documents, his eyes scanning the technical details. He understood what he was seeing. He saw the name of the project, the name of the construction company, and the space for his signature. He understood the power he held in that moment. So, he said, a ghost of his old sneering self returning. After all that, you need something from me. Amelia met his gaze, and instead of the cold fury he expected, she offered him something else entirely. Yes, she said, her voice quiet and devoid of artifice. I do. This is a very important project for my company. It will create hundreds of jobs and revitalize an entire neighborhood. And it's stalled. Without your signature, we can't move forward. She didn't threaten. She didn't posture. She simply stated the truth. She laid her power down on the table, not as a weapon, but as a fact. And in doing so, she disarmed him completely. He was prepared for a fight, for a rematch. He was not prepared for this quiet, vulnerable honesty. He stared at her, his mind clearly working, grappling with this new dynamic. This was not the vindictive monster he had created in his stories. This was not the decorative housewife he had once known. This was someone new, someone who didn't need to prove anything to him anymore. Finally, he picked up the pen she had placed on the table. "Where do I sign?" he asked, his voice rough. "Turkey tu sada." She pointed to the line. He signed his name, his hand shaking slightly. The transaction was complete. "Thank you, Richard," she said, gathering the documents. As she stood to leave, he spoke again, his voice so quiet she almost didn't hear it. "The foundation," he said, not looking at her. "The work you're doing. It's impressive." It was the closest he would ever come to an apology, to an acknowledgement of her worth. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was a crack in the wall of his pride, a glimmer of light in the darkness of their shared history. "Yes," Amelia said, a genuine smile touching her lips for the first time. "It is." She walked away from him, out of the beige hallways, and back into the vibrant, sunlit world she had built. The victory she felt was different from any she had known before. It wasn't the sharp, fiery triumph of conquest. It was a quiet, deep, and steady warmth. It was the peace that comes not from winning a war, but from choosing to end it. That evening, she didn't go back to her silent penthouse. She went to the house on Willow Lane, where the lights were on and the sound of laughter and excited chatter spilled out into the garden. Maya and 2 other mentees were there, working late, fueled by pizza and ambition. They were sketching out a new marketing plan on a large whiteboard in the dining room. "Amelia, you're just in time to settle a debate," Maya called out. Amelia smiled, taking it all in. This was her home now. Not the building, but the energy within it. The community, the purpose. She had started her journey by trying to conquer a world that had dismissed her. She had ended it by building a new one. The loneliness she had felt in her fortress in the sky was gone, replaced by the chaotic, vibrant, and deeply fulfilling connections she was forging here. Her empire wasn't just made of glass and steel anymore. It was made of people, of potential, of futures she was helping to build. It was a different kind of kingdom, and a different kind of crown. And it fit perfectly. 7 more years passed, each one solidifying Amelia Vance's legend. The Vance Foundation became a kingmaker, or rather a queenmaker in the world of startups, launching the careers of dozens of women who had been told their ideas were too niche, too ambitious, or too female. Amelia herself had transitioned from a hands-on CEO to a more strategic role as chairwoman of her boards, her focus almost entirely on philanthropy. She had found a rhythm to her life that was powerful yet peaceful. The ghosts of her past had receded, becoming not specters, but faded photographs in a book she no longer read. Then, one crisp autumn afternoon, a call was transferred to her personal line by a nervous new assistant. "I'm so sorry to bother you, Ms. Vance," the assistant stammered, "but he said it was a personal matter. A Mr. Leo Thompson." Amelia's hand tightened on her pen. She hadn't spoken to Leo in nearly a decade, though she still received his sporadic, quiet emails, which she had long since stopped deleting. They were like postcards from a foreign country she had once visited. "It's all right, Sarah," she said, her voice even. "Put him through." A moment of static, and then a voice she would have recognized anywhere, though it was different now. Deeper, quieter, stripped of its old, easy confidence. "Amelia, it's Leo. I hope I'm not, I know this is unexpected." "Leo," she said, her tone neutral. "It is. Is everything all right?" "Yes, I'm fine." "We're fine," he said, the we hanging in the air. "Listen, I wouldn't be calling, I swear I wouldn't. But I'm not calling for me." He took a breath, and she could hear the effort it took him to ask. "My wife, Anna, she's a brilliant biochemist. She's been working on a new type of biodegradable polymer derived from agricultural waste. It could replace single-use plastics in a huge range of applications. It's revolutionary." Amelia listened, her mind automatically shifting into business mode, analyzing the potential, the market, the hurdles. "The problem," Leo continued, his voice laced with a familiar frustration she recognized from her own past, "is that she can't get funding. She's been told it's too, early stage. She's been told the science is, a little complex for us. One investor told her she should find a male CEO to be the face of the company. The same old story. The irony was so thick, so potent, it was almost comical. He was now living on the other side of the looking glass, witnessing firsthand the dismissiveness he had once been blind to. So, he finished, the words clearly costing him a great deal of pride, I told her about your foundation. I told her that you understand this. She's applying for the next round of funding. I'm not asking for any special treatment. I wanted you to hear it from me, so you'd know it was real, so you wouldn't just dismiss it because of my name. The man who had once been the gatekeeper of her life was now humbly asking her not to judge his wife by his own past. The world had truly turned upside down. Every application is judged on its own merits, Leo, she said, her voice softening slightly. If the science is sound and the business plan is viable, it will get a fair review. That's the entire point of the foundation. I know, he said, relief evident in his voice. Thank you, Amelia. That's all I could ask for. After the call, Amelia sat in silence, looking out at the city. For years, Leo had been a ghost, a memory. Now, he had stepped back into her world, not as a former husband, but as an advocate for a woman he believed in, a role he had never been able to play for her. The story wasn't over after all. There was one final chapter to be written. Housewife. 2 months later, Oroplast, the company founded by Dr. Anna Reyes Thompson, was selected as one of the 3 finalists for the Vance Foundation's annual grant, the largest and most prestigious award. The selection was made by an independent board, but Amelia had reviewed the application herself. The science was more than sound. It was breathtaking. The final stage was a personal interview and presentation with Amelia herself at the foundation's headquarters. 124 Willow Lane. Amelia waited in the sun-drenched conference room, the former living room where she had been so casually dismissed. She felt a profound sense of calm. She was not here as a wife or a daughter-in-law, but as a mentor, a benefactor, an elder stateswoman of industry. Leo and Anna arrived together. Leo looked older, his hair graying at the temples, but he wore an expression of quiet contentment she'd never seen on him before. He was not the lead. He stood slightly behind his wife, carrying her presentation case, his role clearly that of a supporter. The gesture was not lost on Amelia. Anna was radiant, sharp, intelligent, and crackling with a nervous energy Amelia recognized instantly. Ms. Vance, Anna said, extending her hand. It is an incredible honor to be here. The honor is mine, Dr. Reyes Thompson, Amelia replied, shaking her hand firmly. Your work is extraordinary. Leo stood back, giving a small, respectful nod. Amelia? Leo, she acknowledged, with the same polite warmth. The presentation was brilliant. Anna spoke with passion and precision, fielding Amelia's pointed questions with an ease that demonstrated a total mastery of her field. Leo remained silent, an attentive and proud spectator. In him, Amelia saw the man he could have been, had he been raised by a different father, in a different world. He was a good man who had been a passive participant in a casual cruelty. Now, he was an active participant in his wife's ambition. People could change. Australis. After the formal presentation, as they were packing up, Amelia asked Anna, "What made you pursue this, even after so much rejection?" Anna glanced at her husband. Honestly, Leo did. When I was ready to give up, he was the one who kept pushing. He told me that genius is wasted if it gives in to ignorance. He told me about you. Amelia looked at Leo, who met her gaze without flinching. I told her, he said simply, that I spent 10 years married to a genius, and I was too blind to see it. I told her I wouldn't make that mistake again. The admission was not an apology aimed at winning her back. It was a simple statement of fact, a testament to his own evolution. It was the most profound acknowledgement he had ever given her. Oroplast was awarded the grant. It was an objective business decision, but one that felt deeply personally right. The day after the public announcement, Amelia was at the house on Willow Lane, reviewing blueprints for a new wing the foundation was adding, when Leo appeared at the open door, alone. "I hope this is okay," he said. "I just wanted to thank you, not just for the grant, but for seeing her, for giving her a fair shot." "She earned it, Leo," Amelia said, turning from the blueprints. "She's going to change the world." "I know," he smiled. "I'm a lucky man." They stood in a comfortable silence for a moment, the ghosts between them finally at peace. "This place has changed," he said, looking around the bright, airy room, now filled with the energy of female ambition. "So have we," she replied. "My father passed away last year," he said quietly. "It was peaceful. In his last few years, he talked about you. He kept that orchid you gave him. He actually managed to keep it alive. He said it reminded him that things can grow in the most unexpected places." Amelia felt a tear prick her eye, a genuine, cleansing sadness for the man Richard was, and the man he might have been. "I'm sorry for your loss, Leo." "Thank you," he said. "In a strange way, what you did, it set him free too. It forced him to shed the skin of the man he thought he had to be. He was quieter at the end, more real." He looked at her, his eyes full of a history that no longer hurt. "You know, for years I was angry. Then I was ashamed. Now I think I'm just grateful. The life I have with Anna, the man I am now, it wouldn't exist without the life I had with you. The lessons came late and hard, but they came." "They did for me too," she admitted. "I built an empire out of anger and pride. It took me a long time to learn how to rule it with grace." He nodded, a final perfect understanding passing between them. He extended his hand. "Good luck with everything, Amelia Vance." She shook it, her grip firm. "You too, Leo Thompson." He turned and walked away, disappearing down the quiet suburban street, a good man going back to his happy life. Amelia stood in the doorway of the house that had started it all, not as a victor, but as a survivor. She had won the war, lost the marriage, built an empire, and in the process, found herself. She was no longer defined by her victory over Richard and Leo, but by the legacy she was building in the lives of women like Anna and Maya. The hole in her life that she thought could only be filled with success and recognition had been filled instead with purpose. She turned back inside, towards the sounds of her foundation at work, and felt the quiet, unshakable peace of a story that had, at long last, found its true and final ending. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.